This content is AI generated for informational purposes only and should not be directly used for clinical decision-making.
Hello, and welcome back to the Neurosurgery Hub podcast. I'm Dr. Aris, Senior Attending Neurosurgeon.
And I'm Dr. Alara, Research Fellow. Today, we're looking at a fascinating new study from Acta Neurochirurgica, published in 2026, titled Endovascular-Assisted Microsurgical Clipping of Ophthalmic Segment Aneurysms.
This is a topic that really hits home for anyone who has spent time in the subarachnoid space around the paraclinoid region. Ophthalmic segment aneurysms, or OSAs, are notoriously difficult because of their anatomy. Ilara, why don't you start us off by reminding the listeners why proximal control is such a headache in these cases?
Exactly, Dr. Aris. As the paper points out, proximal arterial control is critical for safe and effective clipping. You need it to minimize intraoperative blood loss if there's a rupture, but more importantly, it reduces aneurysmal turgor. That softening of the aneurysm makes it much easier to apply the clip safely. It also reduces the risk of distal embolization of any intraluminal thrombi.
Right, and traditionally, we've had to be quite invasive to get that control. The paper mentions the gold standard has often been a separate neck dissection to expose the cervical internal carotid artery, the ICA. Or you're looking at exposing the petrous ICA in the middle fossa, or trying to get local control via dissection beyond the distal dural ring.
And those methods come with a price: prolonged operative time and increased surgical morbidity. That's where this study comes in. The authors, Del Latti and colleagues, evaluated the use of temporary balloon occlusion, or TBO, using endovascular access as a primary method for proximal ICA control during clipping.
It's a hybrid approach, really. They used newer generation endovascular balloon guide catheters. Let's look at the study design. This was a retrospective review over a 10-year period from 2014 to 2023.
They looked at 34 patients with 35 OSAs. The inclusion criteria were adult patients undergoing elective or urgent microsurgical clipping where TBO was the planned primary method for proximal control. A key part of their analysis was comparing the patients who actually had the balloon inflated, the plus TBO group, against those where the catheter was placed but inflation wasn't necessary, the minus TBO group.
That's an important distinction. Just having the balloon there as a safety net is different from actually needing to use it to soften the sac. What did the demographics and the aneurysm morphology look like in this cohort?
The sizes were quite varied. Aneurysm sizes ranged from 2.8 millimeters all the way up to 18.0 millimeters, with a mean of 6.7 millimeters. The neck sizes ranged from 1.6 to 8.1 millimeters. Interestingly, they found a significant difference when it came to wide-necked aneurysms, which they defined as greater than 4 millimeters.
I saw that. The plus TBO group, the ones where they actually inflated the balloon, had a much higher proportion of those wide-necked aneurysms. We're talking 55% in the plus TBO group versus only 26.7% in the minus TBO group. This makes sense clinically. A wider neck often means a more complex turgid sac that requires more manipulation.
Exactly. And there was another significant correlation: the need for an anterior clinictomy. In the group where TBO was performed, 84.2% of cases required an anterior clinictomy, compared to only 46.7% in the group where the balloon stayed deflated.
That really highlights the complexity of these cases. If you're doing a clinictomy, you're usually dealing with an aneurysm that is more proximal or tucked under the bone, making proximal control even more elusive through traditional intracranial means. Let's talk about the procedure itself. They successfully navigated the balloon guide catheter to the cervical carotid in 100% of cases. That's impressive.
It is. And they actually performed the TBO in 19 of those patients, covering 20 aneurysms. The beauty of this, as the authors note, is that it also facilitates real-time intraoperative angiography. You have the access right there.
For the residents listening, think about the workflow. Instead of a surgical assistant holding a temporary clip in a tight space or having a second incision in the neck, you have an endovascular setup where the balloon can be inflated on demand. It clears the surgical field. Now, Ilara, what about the outcomes? That's what our colleagues will care about most.
The radiographic results were excellent. They achieved complete or near complete occlusion, meaning a remnant of less than 2 millimeters in all cases, every single one.
And what about the safety aspect? Any major complications?
They reported a complication rate of 2.9% with permanent sequela. Specifically, there was one complication in the 34 patients.
But when they compared the plus TBO and minus TBO groups, they found no significant differences in complication rates or functional outcomes.
That's a vital point. Inflating the balloon didn't seem to add extra risk compared to just having it there. The median modified Rankin scale, or MRS, at follow-up was 0, so most patients returned to their baseline functional status.
The paper concludes that endovascular-assisted TBO is a safe and effective minimally invasive alternative to open neck dissection. They specifically mention it might be particularly advantageous for managing those wide-necked aneurysms we discussed earlier.
I want to dive a bit deeper into the technical advantages mentioned in the text. The authors point out that traditional proximal control, like the Petrus ICA exposure, isn't just time-consuming. It carries risks like injury to the greater superficial petrosal nerve or even the facial nerve. By using TBO, you bypass those risks entirely.
They also discussed the as-needed nature of this technique. In about 43% of their cases, the minus TBO group, they didn't even need to inflate the balloon, but having it there allowed them to proceed with the microsurgical dissection with the confidence that they could achieve immediate control if an intraoperative rupture occurred.
It's about that peace of mind in the hot seat. Dealing with an OSA is stressful enough without worrying about a proximal ICA that you can't reach. The authors also highlight that this technique avoids the potential complications of a neck incision, like hematomas or cranial nerve injuries, specifically the marginal mandibular or laryngeal nerves.
One thing for our listeners to keep in mind is the newer generation catheters mentioned. The study suggests that as endovascular technology evolves, the ease of navigating these balloon guide catheters increases, making this hybrid approach more feasible for more centers.
It really points toward a more integrated neurosurgical suite. You aren't just a clipper or a coiler, you're using the best of both worlds to manage a complex lesion in a difficult anatomical location.
To summarize for the residents, ophthalmic segment aneurysms require proximal control. While neck dissection is the traditional route, this 10-year study shows that endovascular TBO is just as effective, potentially less morbid, and provides the added benefit of intraoperative angiography.
And specifically, if you're looking at a wide-necked aneurysm or one that requires an anterior clinictomy, TBO should be high on your list for proximal control strategies.
That's right. The study really reinforces that TBO can be the primary method for proximal ICA control in these cases, without compromising functional or radiographic outcomes.
Excellent summary, Alara. This paper from Acta Neurochirurgica is definitely worth a full read for anyone planning to tackle these paraclinoid lesions. It's a great example of how hybrid techniques are shaping the future of our field.
Thanks for joining us today on the Neurosurgery Hub podcast. We'll link the study in the show notes.
Until next time, keep learning and keep operating. I'm Dr. Aris.
And I'm Dr. Alara. See you in the next episode.